Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many friends and family of Paul and Sheila, Marcia, Tom, Mary, and Will. Whenever I think of going to meetings and gatherings with Paul, I remember how much he appreciated people taking time out of their busy schedules to meet with him and to discuss the issues of the day. He knew the importance of showing up, so thank you all for being here today. It's important and healing to be surrounded by so many people who love Paul and Sheila, Marcia, Tom, Mary, and Will, and to know that their efforts to build the America that they envisioned has continued through the work and efforts of all of us. A couple of weeks ago, my son Bhupesh and I were talking about Paul, and I asked him about his memories and what they were. And he talked about going to a number of conventions as a boy and how boring most of the speeches were. Until Paul Wellstone would speak. He said thinking about Paul made him remember this quote from Cornel West: "You can't lead the people if you don't love the people." And that was Paul. Paul loved all of us. That's why he was so effective. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Lisa Radosevich Craig, and I had the honor and privilege of working for Paul, serving as his Northern Minnesota director for 7.5 years, working along with the Korean War veteran Jim Shaw and constituent advocate Ann Olson. October 25th, 2002 was a terrible day. Today marks the 10th anniversary since the plane crash that took the lives of U.S. Senator Paul Wellstone, his wife Sheila Wellstone, his daughter Marcia Wellstone Markison, and staff members Tom Lapic, Mary McEvoy, and Will McLaughlin. It's been tough. Their deaths were a tremendous loss, and my heart is still full of sorrow. I miss them. In preparing for today, I was looking over past speeches and realized that much is still the same. I still struggle to make sense of their death, and since I haven't been able to, I focus instead on remembering them and staying committed to the ideals that shaped their life. They were all so passionate and ready to do the hard work that it takes to organize and inspire and to make our communities in America a better place. They loved the work they did, they loved the people, and they had a lot of fun. To think of Paul, or Will, or Marcia, or Mary, they were always smiling and laughing, working extremely hard, but having fun while they worked. I have wonderful memories, especially of Paul and Sheila and Tom Lapic. I'm going to give a brief bio of Paul Wellstone. Paul was born in 1944, grew up in Arlington, Virginia, went to college at the University of Northern Carolina in Chapel Hill, where he had a scholarship to wrestle. He married Sheila at the age of 19, and they had 3 children, David, Mark, and Marcia, while Paul attended college and graduate school. He earned a PhD in political science in 1969 and moved to Northfield, Minnesota to teach at Carleton College. Paul taught there for 21 years before being elected to the U.S. Senate. During his time at Carleton, Paul was an active grassroots organizer traveling the state to support and encourage people and their struggles. Paul carried his belief in the grassroots into his political life and ran his campaign on a modest budget with lots of volunteers, including many college students. Paul was not expected to win the U.S. Senate seat. He was not what most people thought of as a typical senator. But in that election in 1990, Paul became the only U.S. Senate contender to unseat an incumbent. He was reelected in 1996 in a rematch with Rudy Boschwitz. And in the past, most senators in Minnesota had maintained one state office and located it in the Twin Cities. Paul broke that mold. He felt it was very important to get to the rural and small town perspective on issues, to be more accessible, and to be constantly in touch with people. Paul and Sheila loved northern Minnesota. He completely identified with the people here. so it was an obvious choice for him to have an office on the range and one in Wilmer. Paul's work covered an amazing variety of issues, and he worked hard for what he called the people's interest. His philosophy was clearly demonstrated in this 1997 statement against the budget agreement, when he said, "I support balancing the budget through a process which observes basic principles of economic and social growth and embodies the notion of shared sacrifice in pursuit of the common good, the common interest, the people's interest." To Paul, the basic principles of economic and social justice included ensuring quality education, affordable and accessible health care, and good jobs for Minnesota families, not tax cuts for the wealthiest of Americans. Yeah. And while there isn't time to list all of Paul's accomplishments, let me give a few examples. Paul fought to restore cuts to small business programs. On education, he co-sponsored legislation that would provide federal funding for special education. A strong proponent of Americans' veterans, Paul successfully fought for expanded federal funding for health care for our veterans. He expanded conservation efforts that would lend to healthier habitat for wildlife and improved water quality for Minnesota's lakes, streams, and wetlands. Paul and Sheila were recognized as national leaders on the issue of domestic violence. Paul Wellstone co-authored the original Violence Against Women Act and then expanded initiatives to prevent domestic violence and protect victims of violence in their own home. On health care, Paul fought to improve our rural health care systems, and he and Republican Senator Pete D'Amici co-authored the Mental Health Parity Act of 2001. And of particular interest to so many people in northern Minnesota was Paul's work for fair trade. The list could go on and on. Senator Wellstone's legacy is that of commitment and hard work, optimism and idealism. And with his incredible spirit and energy, Paul put into action the belief that in order to succeed, you have to work hard and sometimes you have to agitate. Now we're all building on that history. Today, we have a wonderful group of friends and elected officials to help us celebrate the lives of Paul, Sheila, Marcia, Tom, Mary, and Will. A special welcome to Senators Harkin, Klobuchar, and Franken, along with Lieutenant Governor Yvonne Prittner-Solon, Congressman Nolan, State Representative Tom Rukavina, Joe Begich, Aaron Murphy, Tony Surdich, State Senator Dave Tomasoni, and St. Louis Commissioners Steve O'Neill and Frank Jewell. Carly Moline, excuse me, Carly. Commissioner Nelson. Anyone else I missed? Okay. I also want to thank Ben Goldfarb, Executive Director of Wellstone Action, and Mark Rubin, our St. Louis County Attorney. Joe Begich, I think I said him already, but Joe Begich. None of us would be here if it wasn't for Joe Begich. Yeah, thank you. Okay, oh yes, and Senator Al Franken over here. For the third time, Al Franken. Thank you all for the work that you do. Our program today will flow from person to person, so I'm going to take this time now to introduce those who will be involved in the memorial celebration. We're going to start off with Leanne Littlewolf, Leech Lake Band member, poet, educator, and an Iron Range and Northern Minnesota activist working on youth issues since her days as a student. Leanne will read her poem, which is chiseled in rock here at the entryway of the Wellstone Memorial. After Leanne, Prairie Rose Seminole of the 3 affiliated tribes of North Dakota, a community organizer who has trained others through her work with the White House Project and Wellstone Action, will sing and perform a smudging. Todd Markison, husband of Marcia Wellstone Markison, will follow Prairie Rose. Gabe Brisboy, school teacher, party activist, member of White Earth Band of Ojibwe, and a long, dear friend of Paul's, will deliver remarks. Jerry Fallows, former president of LTV Steelworkers Union, and one who Paul greatly admired and current staffer for Senator Amy Klobuchar, will address us. Steve O'Neill, current St. Louis County Commissioner, longtime activist, and a friend of Paul's, will provide comments, and he'll be followed by George Sundstrom, sheet metal worker, past president of Duluth AFL-CIO and Central Labor Body, one who wanted to retire from the Central Labor Body as the president, but stayed and worked because Paul asked him to. Then I'll come back and introduce a quick closing ceremony. So, Leanne?
Hi, my name is Leanne Littlewolf, and I just want to say a few words about the poem that was written. I received a call from Gabriel Brisbois, and he asked if I'd be willing to put together some words that would go here at this memorial site. And part of the story that often is not told is that on the day of the plane crash, there was a circle of eagles that stayed here the whole day, and they continued to circle. And in our Anishinaabe way, we believe that when spirits leave, that the eagles are the ones that come and help that spirit make that journey. So it was very meaningful to me, and that the eagles are here, and of course they would be. And so I'm going to read this poem, and I want to say that this poem is actually, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to everyone who's here and all the people who believe in the good work that the Wellstones did. And I'm going to ask that everyone would, just if you would hold hands with someone next to you as I read this poem. The eagles circle in a ceremony to guide their kind friends home. Though our time here is brief, an ancient truth circles with the eagles, that spirits never die. They stay alive in love and hope, and eagles' wings touching the sky, and people extending hands to one another to circle like an eagle and bring everyone home. Thank you.
Mi takia pi chanteo stena pechi zapi imakia pia zikalo yami wo ichala hechilena oyate kinipikte wo ichala Paul and Sheila wopida uchosen I wokana. My relatives, my name is Prairie Rose Seminole, and I'm here today to sing a song that has become an anthem for our generation, talking about how we are here, we're still pitiful people, but we're open with our hearts to be the ones who guide the others. And before I sing, I just want to share that my friend and I came from North Dakota to be here today, and on our journey we saw those 5 eagles that were circling. And we might go buy a lottery ticket, but instead we made our offering of tobacco to the lives that were lost this place, and remembered that even though lives were lost, there's still a legacy, and that we can love and we can laugh and we can still share in that sense of community as one, with that vision in mind that we all can be better when we all do better. Hey ya, hey hi, hey ya, hey ya, hey hi, hey ya, hey hi, hey ya, hey yo, hey ya, hey ha, hey ya, hey hi, hey ya, hey hi, hey yo. Tonka shela wakatanka oshe malaye o makiayo hey yo mi chante yuha mazanik telo hoye waelo hey yo hey yo hey yo ha, way out, hail, hail, hail. Way ya ha, way ya ha, way ya ha, do hey yo. Tonka shela wakantanka, o shemalaye, o makiayo, hey yo. Mi chante you ha, mazanik de lo, hoe waelo, hey yo. We ha ha, we hey yo. We ha ha, we hey yo. We ha ha, we ha, we ha do hey yo. Tonka shela wakantanka, o shemalayo, o makiayo, hey yo. Mi chante you ha, mazanik de lo, hoe waelo, hey yo. We ya ha, we hey yo. We ya ha, we hey yo. We ya ha, we ha, we ha, do hey yo. Tonka shela wakantanka, o shemalayo, o makiayo. Mi chante you ha, mazanik de lo, hoe waelo, hey yo. Oh, mi tak, yes. We set the smudge pots back here on the rock because I know people will go in and out of that memorial site. And so we have white cedar burning and we have our sage burning. And what that does is create this welcoming environment for the spirits to come and be here with us today and for them to feel as if they can also depart when we depart. So, mitaki ese.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to place a picture of my beautiful wife, Marcia, down there. For those of you who never saw her smile, you certainly would never forget it. Good afternoon, my name is Todd Markison. I am the husband of Marcia Wellstone Markison. We stand here 10 years to the day that I lost my beautiful wife, I lost my mother and father-in-law, and we lost our dear friends of the campaign. I'm sure we can all remember where we were when the news broke. I remember arriving at the crash scene a few hundred yards back here on that day, smelling the foul odor of the jet fuel, seeing the charred remains of the planes strewn throughout the woods, and seeing the frenzied activity of the NTSB investigators trying to put together what had happened. My life had certainly changed. I remember standing there looking around and saying, how can this happen to me? I guess how can this happen to all of us, right? But my life had changed. 6 weeks ago, my wife Kelly and I we spent the weekend in Duluth, and I decided I needed to stop back. I needed to come by here. It had been a couple of years and I needed to reconnect. I walked back to the crash site and I was taken aback by how the area had healed. The once charred landscape was alive with greens and saplings. The only indicators remaining were a few markers that were left on the trees by the NTSB investigators. If they hadn't been there, you'd never know that anything had happened in that area. I feel this healing process is the same for all of us, certainly for myself. The memories we share, the inspiration that our lost ones have left us with, is how we live our lives every day. I'd like to share a few stories. I received numerous cards and letters from Marcia's students a year, even 2 years after her passing, that felt the need to let me know on how she led their life and how they followed in her footsteps. And I'd like to share a few of those stories with you. Our first one, my name is Bethany. I'm a former student of Profe Markison. In this time of sadness, it is not a sympathy letter. I never got to thank Profe while she was alive, so I figured you, her family, are the next best thing. I had Profe for 2 years, and I can honestly say she taught me the most of all of the teachers I've had in my life. Not only about Spanish, but about how important, about what is important in life, I'm sorry. It was her recommendation that got me into North Central University. It was her influence that helped me discover my calling. And in May 2004, I'm moving to Mexico to become a house mother and a teacher of English at a home for children at risk, or Esperanza Viva, or Living Hope. Her room was always warm. It felt safe. And you knew it was because in Profe Markison's Spanish class, even the most different of individuals were brought together like a long-lost family. She had a funny way of making everyone get along. How during study halls, her room would be a place where anyone was welcome. It was a blessing to know that if something went wrong, you could always go to Profe and she'd know how to fix it. Profe Markison was not only an amazing teacher, she was a friend, she was an advisor, she was an inspiration, and she was a hero to most, and we would greatly missed. Another student, Andrew, writes, I just wanted to say how much Marcia meant to me. I will remember her forever. There was such energy in her classroom, and I'll always admire her for her relationships with students outside of school. My fellow student, Cindy Vet, wants to be a Spanish teacher because of her. It's very special when a teacher can have such an effect on her students. She wasn't just a teacher, she was a friend. I also received a letter from one of the students' mothers, and her name was Nancy. And Nancy wrote me to say, to the Markison family, we as a family have been so thankful that Marcia was in our lives. As you can see, she helped shape who my son and daughter are today. And in my work with victims of domestic violence, I have so very much respected and appreciated what Marcia and her mom did for women in abusive relationships. A few days before the crash, I had the privilege of performing at a women's cancer support fundraiser, and I got to hear Sheila speak. She was just as inspiring as her daughter has always been in the classroom. Please find some comfort in knowing what a gift Marcia was to so many young men and women. Sincerely, Nancy. So when you listen to those letters from the students and from people who knew Marcia, I can't help think of Paul and Sheila. I can't help think of Paul the teacher. I can't think of Paul the friend. I can't help think of Paul the advisor. And I can't help think of Paul the inspiring hero, and Sheila. And I guess it's surely evident that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Marcia's integrity and her enthusiasm for touching people's lives were instilled by Paul and Sheila at a very young age. And it's very comforting for me to know that Marcia's legacy still lives on in all those that she touched. Thank you.
My name is Gabriel Brisboy, and in Lisa's introduction, I heard the greatest words I think I've ever heard in describing me as a long, good friend of Paul Wellstone's. I think that we should recognize some people when we stand here in this beautiful memorial, in this beautiful setting, tragic as it may be. It still is appropriate and natural. A wonderful place where Paul could be remembered in a natural environment, the environmental senator. Well, let me tell you that this place came about because of the work of people up here, particularly Lisa Rodasovich-Craig, David Foster, who was the leader of the steelworkers at the time, and that Commissioners Keith Nelson, St. Louis County Commissioner, procured the property, assisted by Commissioner Steve Rocker. And down in the cities, primarily the leader and the prime mover of the project was Jeff Blodgett and Connie Lewis. So those people should be remembered. In our I recall that when we had our opening ceremony here, when we opened this memorial, that I don't believe Jeff Blodgett or Connie Lewis's names were even mentioned, which was not good, not a good thing. But you know, 1 week after the tragic accident, there was a memorial held on the Iron Range, and 10 people spoke there. They were speaking for the people of the Iron Range, expressing the feelings of the people of the Iron Range, and those people were Reverend Frank Davis, Reverend Dr. Carol Hepikowski, Father John O'Donnell, Senator Mark Dayton, Ida Rukavina, Representative Tom Rukavina, Lisa Radojevich Craig, Kevin Fahey, Congressman Jim Ovestar, and myself. I was really moved by that memorial. It opened up with the Virginia High School Choir singing this national anthem, followed by the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And what a wonderful job. You never believed that this high school choir could be so, professional. And it was so appropriate that high school choir did such a great job for another name that we gave Paul Wellstone, and that's the education president. Paul would have been so proud. I wish he could have, I'm sure he heard them, but I wish he could have heard them in the flesh, so to speak. One other thing we didn't, I was the last speaker, and I wanted to compliment those young people on what they had done for the memory of Paul, and I didn't. So I'm taking this opportunity to do it now. If any of you out there were in that choir, you did a wonderful job, and I was so moved by your performance. Anyway, I thought wonderful thoughts were expressed in that memorial, and it took about 2 hours. I would like to condense that memorial for you into about 2 minutes. So I'm going to take some sentences from each speaker and put them into a capsule. And I think it comes out quite well in showing what the Iron Range thinks of the memory of Paul and Sheila and his staff members. And by the way, we also remember and are saddened by the loss of life of Michael Guess and Richard Corey, the two pilots. Okay, here we go. These are sentences taken from the speeches of the people I just mentioned, the names I just read. We, as Iron Rangers, had a special relationship with Paul Wellstone. People from all over the country, California, Massachusetts, and many other states, have called and said, quote, Paul Wellstone represented our values. We considered him our senator too. It is our dream, it is our hope, it is our prayer that what has happened to this tragedy might serve as some source of inspiration for all of us. Paul Wellstone will never be replaced by anybody. He cared so much about people, he cared so much about communities, he drew a source of strength and resolve from the people of the Iron Range. Paul loved people. He wanted to know their life stories. He was a friend to auto mechanics and nurses, hotel cleaners, steel workers, teachers, veterans, and people of all walks of life. Paul Wellstone always made it a point to talk to kids and visit every high school on the Iron Range. So, it's the young people's charge to carry on the principles that he supported. Paul and Sheila had a special fondness for the Iron Range. Paul said many times that this was his second home. Paul and Sheila were champions for the people, and we were blessed to have them on our side. Becoming a friend of Paul Wellstone was an easy thing to do. You could be Paul Wellstone's friend by opening up your heart to the love that Paul had for humanity. Paul Wellstone restored the populist spirit to Minnesota politics, to improve the lives of the least among us, and to be a stirring voice for those who lost theirs. We need a word in our language that would mean an act of striving for social justice, a word that would mean an act of standing up for the benefit of others. There should be a word in our language for that. And that word should be Wellstone. Paul and Sheila, the Iron Range will never forget you. Those are some of the things that we heard in that memorial. And there was a couple other things that I didn't include here that I think should be included, and one is in Lisa Radosevich's Craig's comments. She said that many times in her duties as Paul's staff member up here, she was asked to try to get Paul on a schedule to come to various events on the Iron Range and speak. And many times she would have to say, well, I'm sorry, I thought Paul was going to be able to come, but some conflict came up, and we can't have Paul there. And so Sheila is going to come instead, and the people would say, oh, that's okay, because we really wanted Sheila in the first place. That was one of the human stories that came out of that memorial. Another thing was that Representative Rukavina, who was usually quiet and unassuming, mentioned in his speech that, and this is a week after the tragedy, the people had already started talking about that there should be a memorial in honor of Paul Wellstone. And Representative Rukavina said that he thought, because of the connection between Paul and the Iron Range, that the memorial should be on the Iron Range, and here it is. One last thing I'd like to say on a personal note, and off the subject a little bit, but I'd just like to say how proud I am of Leanne Littlewolf, a very good friend of mine. Since in the 10 years since we dedicated this memorial, she has earned a master's degree and is working on another master's degree in another subject. And I also like to say I'm very proud of her sister, Nevada Littlewolf, serving her second term as city council member on the Virginia City Council. Really a fine accomplishment, and it's one that Paul would give a standing ovation for. So I think we should give him a hand too. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Such a humbling experience to be able to be here today to speak. I think, whenever people gather and Senator Wellstone's name comes up, everybody has a Wellstone story to tell, and I'm no exception to that. I first met Senator Wellstone, I first got to know Senator Wellstone back in 2000 when LTD announced they were going to shut down the mining facility in White Lakes. Senator Wellstone was genuinely outraged that people that had worked for a company all their lives were going to lose their health care. He ultimately introduced the healthcare tax credit that will allow people, not only in Minnesota, but across the United States, to be able to afford to buy healthcare that normally wouldn't be able to buy it. But I think the event that sticks out most in my mind is, it was a couple of weeks before Christmas after LTV announced they were going to shut down. Senator Wellstone stopped by my office, and after the usual pleasantries, Senator said, "Jerry, there's something that really bothers me, and I'm going to do something about it." I said, "I'm sure you are, Senator." He said, "I can't help stop thinking about all the kids that of the families that worked at LTV that aren't going to have a very Merry Christmas this year." He says, I'm going to write a check from me and Sheila, and I want you to do something nice for this family, for all the families." It wasn't the fact that he was going to write a check that he wanted to do something nice, but he also told me, he said, "I don't want you to tell anybody about it." He says, "I want it just between you and me." I think, the fact that the senator didn't want me to tell anybody just goes to prove that the senator did so many things behind the scene, not for political gain or not for publicity, but he did these things because he truly cared for and loved the people of Minnesota. It's something I'll never forget. Thank you.
Steve O'Neill. Jerry, Paul wrote one of those checks. But I promised not to talk about it, so I won't. I met Paul and Sheila in 1979, and in the early 1980s I got to regularly speak to Paul's classes, recruiting students to work as organizers, researchers for Minnesota COAC, the citizens group, not unlike the group that Paul had worked on in Rice County just a couple years before that. I had the great fortune to stay at Sheila and Paul's home while I was in Northfield, and I learned about the great family humor. Paul could dish it out, as we all know, but Sheila and the kids could put him in his spot in short term. They were an amazing family. My early years with Paul were getting to know him as a teacher, as an organizer, and a community leader. In his classes and in his life, he taught countless people the fundamentals of social change, social justice, work for a more caring, just community, and the improvements of people's lives. As Paul would say to his students and people that he worked with in the community, do your research, gather your data, develop a clear and immediate demand, a specific public policy. Paul used to say, we need to know who decides, who pays, who benefits about each of our issues. He'd urge folks to get involved, to be community leaders, to be community organizers. Those are the roles where Paul developed his skills and helped develop and teach other leaders and organizers. He showed us how to empower disenfranchised people, how to move our issues forward, how to consider running for elective office or to help candidates you believed in get elected. Paul and Sheila were part of the inspiration that encouraged me and countless others to run for office, and part of the ideas and wisdom that actually got us elected. There's a piece of this work for each of us in this movement. None of us are going to be Sheila or Paul or possess their unique skills, but each of us can emulate the words on their gravestone. Dedicated, loving, and devoted to our Creator, our family, our friends, to our community, and to our issues for a more just and loving world. I love the bumper sticker, as I'm sure most all of you do, about what would Wellstone do. But I think it's always really been about what should I do? What should each of us do to carry forth those values, those issues, the changes that Paul and Sheila worked on and stood for? Bringing about hope and action to do the right for people of our communities. That's our challenge today, just like it was 10 years ago. Paul and Sheila are still teaching us today. And right at this moment, I think all of us can hear Paul saying, boy, the organizers did a great job in turnout today. Look at all these people. Let's go. Let's put those words, let's put all of that we've learned from Paul and Sheila and the others into action, Wellstone action.
I was told I have 2.5 to 3 minutes to speak, and so we have to be quick. One time I picked up Senator Wellstone over here at the airport. In 1996, he was running for re-election. He had just voted against President Clinton's welfare reform bill. He was the only senator up for re-election that year that voted against that bill. When he got in the car, I had to ask him this. I said, Senator, that must have been a tough vote for you. And I'm going to try to show it to you the same way that he said it to me. He said, George, I'll never vote against children. Never. That stuck with me to this day. On a little bit lighter side, I used to dread driving the car and seeing a red light coming up and a couple people standing on the corner. Because Paul, if he saw 2 people, 3 people out of the car, he'd be over talking to them, the light would change, the horns would honk behind, and he'd come running again and wave to the people. I think they were waving back to him. But I thought if Paul was here today, he would see a different vision for this country than what Chip Kravac and Mitt Romney see for this country. Make no mistake, a vote for Chip Kravac is a vote for Mitt Romney. So unless you have a dressage dancing horse in your barn, or an elevator in your garage, you vote for Nolan, Senator Klobuchar, and President Obama, because they have the others have a completely different vision of this country than Romney does. And we also need all of our local St. Paul delegation, DFL delegation re-elected. My 3 minutes is up. I thank you for the opportunity to address you. Thank you.
George was always a very shy one and never liked telling anyone what we should do. Okay. We're going to end our program, and we're going to have several quotes of Paul's read by Ann Olson, a former Senate staffer for Paul, Dick Miller, the famous bus driver of the Wellstone Green bus, David McLaughlin, Will's brother, Ida Rukavina, former campaign staffer for Paul, granddaughter of Benny Rukavina and AFSCME Council 65 staff representative, and Nevada Little Wolf and her son Mika Woodenich. And then when they're done, Terry Goodsky from Boys Ford is going to end with an honor song. So again, thank you all for coming. After the reading of the quotes, please take time to walk through the memorial and then join us all at Clinton Town Hall for refreshments, video, and words from our great senators, Klobuchar, Franken, and Harkin. And at 7 o'clock tonight, for those of you who can be in Duluth, at the Labor Temple, 20th Avenue East on London Road, the movie Wellstone will be showing, followed by poetry and music. So I am going to start now with one of my favorite quotes and then turn it over to Anne. As Paul said, if we don't fight hard for the things we stand for, at some point we have to recognize that we don't really stand for them. And I urge all of you in the memories of Paul, Sheila, Marcia, Tom, Will, and Mary to live your beliefs. Good intentions are not enough. Thank you. Anne?
Never separate the life you live from the words you speak.
Sometimes the only realists are dreamers.
I'm for the little fellers, not the Rockefellers.
The future will not belong to those that sit on the sidelines. The future will not belong to the cynics. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams.
Politics is about the improvement of people's lives. It's about advancing the cause of peace and justice in our country and the world. Politics is about doing well for the people.
We all do better when we all do better.
Honey, my name is Jerry Goodsky. I'm from the Boys Fort Indian Reservation. I'd like to sing a song here. It's one of the songs that are dear to me. This was made for my brother by a friend of mine here in Minnesota. We normally use it as a flag song. My friend made it, he called it a U.S. flag song. It's for my brother who served in the U.S. Army. But since he gave it to our family, we use it as a memorial song. I'd like to sing it now. Miigwech, that means thank you.